Evening, everyone. So thanks. Still got an echo. Great. So welcome to the first Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the municipal year. First agenda item is election of chair. Does anyone have any nominations for chair?
Can I nominate Mark Brunel Walker, please?
Got a seconder?
Yes, Mark.
Multiple.
Got it. I'd like to second that proposal.
Any other nominations? Okay, Mark Brunel Walker, you are elected chair.
Thank you very much.
Come and sit to the front, please. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chair, and I'd like to nominate Councillor Caroline Smith, please. Do I have a seconder?
And I'd like to second that.
Are there any other nominations? No. Councillor Smith, thank you very much indeed. You've been elected as or appointed as vice chair for the coming year. Right, thank you very much. Right, item 3 is to receive any apologies for absence. Have we been notified of any? Okay. Item 4 is to approve as the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February and the 4th of March. Can somebody who was at the meeting please move? Thank you. Any seconders? Seconded by anyone? Was that?
No one else here.
No one else was here. Okay, in which case then I think we'll have to take those as approved by the one person that was there. Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising not covered in the agenda later on? Thank you. Brilliant. Okay. Agenda item 5 is declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare in the meeting this evening? No. Usual rules apply. If anyone finds they have an interest in an item, just declare it as soon as it's evident. Agenda item 6, public question time. We have one question that has been submitted. I don't believe the gentleman is here. Okay. The question that was asked is further to the question at full council in January, when I asked the schedule be published for maintenance of roads, footpaths and verges. I received I received the answer it will be published once the new schedule has bedded in and considered any feedback. This was January 2024. It will be the end of May when this question is asked again. 4 months should be sufficient to allow any feedback to be considered. So when will the schedule be published? And the answer is the street cleansing schedules have now bedded in, and we're working with our IT and website team to make schedule information available on the website. Following a change to our website provider, we're not currently able to provide the schedule information in the same format as before. We will be adding a temporary schedule by the end of this month, July, which will allow customers to see which month's cleansing will take place in their town or parish. We'll continue to work with our IT and website colleagues to resolve this issue and provide and present the necessary data for general information. And we will work towards this as quickly as possible and update further on this issue in due course. Will that get sent to the questioner? Brilliant. Okay, there are no other public present to ask questions. in which case we will move on to, I've got that right, haven't I? Yes, sorry, member question time. And does any member have any questions at this stage? Okay. Agenda item 8, the Community Safety Partnership update. I'm not sure which officer is presenting. Oh, John, Councillor Montgomery.
Thank you kindly, Mark. So we are noting the reports from the Community Safety Partnership annual report for last year. And at this stage, assuming everyone has read through the report, do we have any questions to come through? No, nothing to note.
Questions?
Narinda, would you like to add anything further to the report?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, committee members, for inviting me tonight to provide an annual update from the Community Safety Partnership Board. Just a few highlight points from myself in terms of the Community Safety Partnership. This is the last year of the current Community Safety Partnership strategy. So this year is the final year. Next year we will be drafting and launching a new report, but this year we would like to just have noted that we've made a number of significant improvements to the community safety overall position of the borough, including a 3% increase in crime, which may on the overall position not seem like a significant improvement in community safety and disorder. But in terms of the numbers of crimes that overall represents, it is a small increase, and indeed the smallest increase we've seen for a number of years across the borough. So just like to bring that to the committee's attention. And I'd also like to just bring to the attention, as is highlighted in the report, a number of different national and regional recognition that the team has received for domestic abuse report, for the domestic abuse, work, and also the work of Channel and Prevent, which has been recognised regionally as some of the good practice, especially given that the borough is a unfunded area. So the work is undertaken by an officer as part of a body of work that officer undertakes. So with that in mind, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Councillor Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. The first one I came across today, actually, on behalf of a resident. They live in a council property, and when they had some problems with their next door neighbour and antisocial behaviour, they were told by the ASB team that they don't cover council properties. Seems a bit strange. And I just wondered if you could confirm if that's correct. That's the first question. And the second question's quite trivial in comparison. I see these press releases, which are great, and I love to see press releases that show people have been caught for doing things which might dissuade others. I don't remember seeing these coming through the council press release process, and I don't know whether I've just missed them or whether they aren't sent out to councillors, but if they aren't, could we have them, please?
Yes, thank you. So with respect to your first question, I'm unaware of the case that you're referring to, so I'm happy to go away and do an investigation together with the team with respect to that. So if maybe you could let me have the details, I'm happy to have a look at that. As a general point, the ASB team, as part of community safety and enforcement, absolutely do cover council accommodation. They are tenure blind, as we like to refer, so i.e. they cover every single property in the borough. So, but I can, if you let me have the details, councillor, I'll go in, have a detailed look at that. And then in respect of the second question, Indeed, there are a number of different press releases that we do undertake throughout the year. We've also added to that a community safety newsletter, which also incorporates some of the enforcement work that we've undertaken as part of the public protection partnership work, and also as part of the community safety work that incorporates our stakeholders. So work that's undertaken by the police, that's undertaken by our fire colleagues, and also by probation and prison staff as well. So we do absolutely try and incorporate sending those out to as many stakeholders as possible. Whether members are routinely copied into that, again, I'm slightly unclear. I will go away and have a chat with our PR lead in the comms team just to make sure what the position is on that. And if they're not, then we can absolutely add those members to the list of people that we distribute, both the newsletter for community safety and also the press releases, which we send out.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
So, wait. I forget. In relation to the thinking about how the strategy will develop, when you had listening to the needs and concerns of local residents as number one, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you changed specifically in your work plan as a result of listening to those people. Yeah. So what was actually changed in your programme because of what residents told you?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of where the evidence tells us work is needed across the community safety partnership field, there was a lot of evidence that came through that told us that burglary was a key priority for the area, as was antisocial behaviour. But certain pockets of antisocial behaviour that wasn't identified in terms of some of the evidence, when we went out to a general survey and engagement to members of the public and residents per se, we were able to highlight pockets. So we were able to highlight issues of particular concern in terms of locations. So we ensured that those locations were added to the hotspot list for both partner patrols. So when we were talking to police colleagues over in the neighbourhoods teams, we were able to add some of those to their lists. We were also able to add some of the early intervention and prevention work in terms of some of the young people's concerns that were added to the work for this strategy. So when we engaged with some of the young people, which was a small bank of young people that we were able to foster some engagement from as part of our work with Reading Football Trust, they were able to tell us about concerns that hadn't been picked up. So those were around concerns about how they feel unsafe in the borough, and most of those in relation to online safety. So a lot of it was around cyber safety concerns, around harassment and bullying online, around concerns around being sent particular messaging, direct messaging. So we were able to add those as part of the priorities for our community safety plan this time round. And I can also confirm for our upcoming strategy, those concerns in terms of the early engagement work that we've done still remain a key focus. So we were able to add those in, which were perhaps not as well documented in terms of some of the evidence that we were having a look at for the strategy and the action plan.
Yeah, just obviously I'm very new to this, so my first meeting in this committee. But I just wanted to say the strategy that we've adopted that is about to be changed, would you have deemed that overall a success or a failure, and on what basis would you make that judgment?
So I think in terms of the strategy, when hopefully you'll agree as looking through the body of work that's been undertaken by the team, there's certainly been huge successes and also huge priority areas that we've been able to make strides on. both with some of our partner agencies who actually join us online. So we've got the Head of Public Protection online and some of the work we've undertaken with our trading standards colleagues in relation to fraud work. That's certainly been a huge success in terms of enforcement and prioritising some of that education and early intervention and prevention work that we've been able to do. Specifically, also some of the antisocial behaviour responses that we've been able to pick up in terms of prioritising some locations and some acute areas that have had some long-term entrenched issues that we've been able to get underneath by doing a joint multi-agency response on some of those areas of work have also been a huge success. So our domestic abuse work has also been recognised, as I said before, nationally as a body of good practice, and has been mentioned by the Home Office a number of times in some of the reports and publications that they've put out. So we've had huge successes in terms of some of those areas of work that we're really, really proud of, especially given the size of the team that we've got at Woking working on these issues. What I would add to that is that we have areas of work that we still need to hugely prioritise and get underneath. So some of the serious violence and exploitation work needs to be prioritised. I think just as domestic abuse and some of the counter-terrorism work was prioritised in the last strategy, we need also to recognise that there's a change in landscape of the body of work that we've got to do is against the background of change in terms of AI and technology making things very different now. So we need to try and understand that world better in terms of what it means for crime and disorder. And also in terms of serious violence and exploitation, there is more risk for certainly from what we understand in terms of feelings of safety for us to address for young people around how they feel in the borough and their feelings of safety that also we need to prioritise. So we've made, in summary, probably we've made huge strides and leaps forward in terms of the crime and disorder work that we've prioritised. But the landscape and the context has changed massively over the last 3 years, not least because of the implications of COVID. And we need now to ensure that we follow really the evidence that we've been able to review over the last 3 to 5 years in terms of the changing context and background to reprioritise some of those areas that I've just talked about in order to make strides and prioritise that work against the changing background and context which we now face.
Thank you very much. So it sounds like you've had some real areas of success within the programme, but perhaps there is also areas for significant improvement and development, which sounds very fair. Do you think that the community is safer than it was when you started the strategy?
From the feedback that we've received directly from the community, because we do evaluate the work that we've undertaken, certainly, I think if you look through the body of the report, there's certainly some extracts of direct feedback from members of the public that have received the services, both from police colleagues, from public protection team, and also from the antisocial behaviour officers working on the ground. And direct quotes such as, I now feel safer in my home. There's some other, I'm no longer disrupted by noise. It's a lot quieter. There's been 100% difference. I think those sorts of quotes really directly from residents speak for themselves really, which is, the numbers can tell a story, but I think in terms of direct feedback from the residents, that certainly speaks volumes for the work and the hard work that the officers have done over the last year.
I totally agree with that, and I think the individuals is a really positive message. It'd be interesting to have a larger body of information behind that, maybe getting feedback from a larger proportion of residents through some sort of survey or something would be interesting. Thank you.
Oh, use that one.
So it's on a particular point on page 34. It's reoffending with the youth. I presume it's only going a short time. Are you going to go back and carry on once they stop being young youths? Because I understand that children looked after are more likely to reoffend. So I presume a youth goes up to 22, 23, and then will you keep an eye on them beyond that to see if they are reoffending as an adult? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So in terms of our youth offending service, that service takes us up to 18 currently for the statutory service. What we have in place, which we've developed over the last year, is transitional arrangements. And we're working really closely with our colleagues in children's services and also adult social care to ensure some of those transitional services are far more robust than they have been, certainly in previous years. It's been an area of development that's been recognised. And in short, what it means is just because somebody reaches 18 doesn't mean their risk of offending or risk of vulnerability stops at that point. So those transitional arrangements take us up to 25, but also there and beyond. So what we're trying to ensure is that age doesn't limit the resourcing or the ability to be able to support people who have vulnerabilities around crime and disorder.
If there's no more questions in the room, we actually have a representative from Thames Valley Police joining us on Teams this evening, and I apologise. I'm so sorry, Polly.
Wasn't a question. I've just had a message from George Evans, who's stuck in traffic on the M3, so he's apologising for being late.
Thank you for that. Yes, so we have a representative from Thames Valley Police joining us on Teams this evening. I apologise, I don't have the officer's name, but Tracy, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything you'd like to add to the report, or maybe to take questions from any of the panel members, committee members?
Very happy to take any questions if you've got anybody that anybody wants to ask.
Are there any questions in the room?
Hi, Tracy. It'd be good to have an update on your community policing and how that's going.
Just to clarify, do you mean in relation to the neighbourhood policing and the certain aspects of engagement, or what specifically in relation to community policing?
Well, I think in the past we've been a bit short of community police. They've been dragged to Windsor and all sorts of places, and I just wonder if you could give us an update on how that's going, how the new recruits are getting on, and whether we're getting more on the ground.
So I'll try my very best, and just to give you a bit of context, I'm relatively new to the local police area, so I've been here since the start of May, so I hope I'm going to be able to answer all your questions. So yeah, we have had some challenges around resourcing levels for the neighbourhood policing. That is starting to become a bit less problematic, and we're starting to get those positions filled. You're probably aware that we're undergoing quite a large restructure within Thames Valley Police at the moment, and we obviously community policing and neighbourhood policing is becoming a real priority and a real area of focus for us. So those vacancies are becoming sort of less and less, and we are filling those positions. The work that the neighbourhood team are undertaking, it continues to be a challenge and intensive, and so we obviously recognise the importance for filling those vacancies. We've had some good results, as Narinder said, even with the limited amount of police officers that we've had in those posts, and hopefully moving forward, as the vacancies become less and they get the support that they need with the less obstructions, hopefully we'll see more and more positive results. I hope that answers your question without giving you too much detail.
Great. Any more questions from anybody on this topic? Jordan, sorry, you had your hand raised earlier. I think it was about an earlier comment. Brilliant. Thank you. Question from Steve Brown. Apologies, I haven't got my laptop open, so I can't see hands going up.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Chair. It was really just to add to some of the earlier questions, and perhaps for members to consider, the value and the benefit that we get from the Community Safety Partnership. So all of those groups, organisations, the police, counter-terrorism police, probation service, social services, children's services, we're all working collectively and collaboratively around the table on the community safety partnership. We're sharing information, building relationships. Officers from all the agencies are able individually and combined to make better and more informed decisions. We're able to sort of talk to what was the previous government, but the new government now, about issues, and talk to them about policy and levering in funding. So not only in the operational, those decisions, those relationships, those ability to work collectively together, share data and information and resources to a degree is really of a value to Wokingham Borough Council and the wider community. And that aspect of the community safety partnership shouldn't be overlooked or not considered. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to bring in my colleague Sean Murphy, if that's okay, just to add some information around some of the public protection and fraud related crime activity, because I know this committee has been interested in that area of work previously, and it certainly is a very emerging and concerning area of work for us in terms of cybercrime and the numbers and issues affecting the borough.
Thank you. Thanks, Narinda. Thank you, Chair. So those that don't know me, I think some of you do, but I'm the service lead for public protection, and I oversee the shared trading standards service and other associated services that we have with Wokingham, West Berkshire and Bracknell. So just picking up on your point, actually, Steve, I think that there are a few things that have changed in the landscape here. One of them is the ability that we now have, and the benefits that we derive from the sharing of intelligence between the various agencies. But we now live in a time, I think, basically where I've been in trading standards for many years, 3 decades plus, and it's changed out of all recognition. I mean, at one time, basically, as trading standards officers, we used to basically go out there looking at crime that was perpetrated by retailers and car dealers, and some of that stuff still goes on. But nowadays, obviously, people can become victims of crime at almost every level in their own homes. And quite sophisticated crimes. Narinda's touched on AI, but the work around cybercrime, e-crime, and long-standing areas of work around doorstep crime or fraud basically perpetrated on householders hasn't gone away. What it does mean is that we have a situation where you need an ever-increasing skill set to investigate those matters. And now what we're seeing more and more is a lot of this stuff is associated with organised crime groups, and sitting behind an awful lot of it is money laundering, and the work that we do around that. So I think I just really to recognise that the bits that we see at the tip of the iceberg, I feel that the work that we've done with victims of scams and frauds are really good pieces of work. We've changed people's lives in many respects, basically as organisations, preventing them basically from becoming further victims of crime, maybe on occasions putting them through safeguarding processes and everything else. But it is a developing issue. Thames Valley Police have made this a priority. We have it down as a priority as a council here, basically through the Training Standards Service and the Community Safety Service. But I really just wanted to highlight the fact that it is a very and increasingly complex area, and staying ahead of the game is a real challenge for us. But I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions around the room? No? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Any other topics on this item? We're all happy to note the update from officers. Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, moving on. Thank you for the updates, the information. We're now moving to the Enforcement and Safety Service and to receive an update on the work of the service in 23-24. Narinda, is that with you again, or is that? Sorry, I should go to the exec member first. Sorry.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, this is to note the Enforcement and Safety Service report. And once again, take any questions at this stage. So we've all gone through the slides, or if not, I will pass to Narinda to present the reports. Brand Narinda.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to quickly share the slides so I can just canter through them quickly. That's okay. Should be. Steve, there's a hand up to Steve Brown online. I don't know. Is that on?
Steve, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Apologies, Chair, it shouldn't be any hand at all. I'll have a look.
Thank you. So in respect of this report, this is the Community Safety and Enforcement Service update in terms of performance. So just to take the committee through that, this service is a mixture of statutory and local priority services. So the disciplines within the enforcement side of the service include environmental health, environmental protection, private sector housing work, licensing work, antisocial behaviour in terms of enforcement and the envirocrime work of the council, and also the community safety update and trading standards shared service in terms of public protection work. So that is really the scope of the entire team for enforcement and safety. So the purpose, which is outlined in terms of the report, just overall takes you through the reason why the service exists. And really it's in terms of enforcing the public health and environment legislation and statutory work that we have a provision and duty to undertake to reduce the prevention of crime and disorder that we've already spoken about, to investigate complaints, carry out inspections, give advice to residents and business owners, carry out our licensing function, and also to ensure that any enforcement of failure to meet any of those required standards and behaviours are enforced. So the team has undertaken a number of different inspections. If I just go through what the commercial team has undertaken, just a quick canter through. So a number of different food businesses and workspace health and safety inspections have been undertaken. A number of different food businesses were inspected as the report outlines, and of course there is the huge event which is Henley Royal Regatta and the Rewind Festival, which are annual events for the team to both organise, ensure that the safety standards are in line with what is expected, but also in terms of businesses that may not have made those standards, there's been a number of different coaching and educational sessions undertaken to ensure that those businesses can improve their scores. The teams are undertaken a number of different proactive inspections as well as reactive inspections as would be expected, and the number of service requests for food related work has been increasing, as has the number of riddle reports, which is in relation to the regulations of disease and disease occurrences for the team to undertake inspections around. In relation to street trading and premises licenses, there's been a number of different works that the team have undertaken, as well as some TENS enforcement work, which is in relation to the temporary event notices that the team must also adhere to. So just taking also us through the residential and environmental protection work that the team's been working on. There's been a number of different service requests, 878, as you can see, just on the environmental residential protection side. And there's also been a number of different planning application consultations, which the team have seen an increase in terms of the workload being asked to, being responded to, which is really important in terms of being able to respond to any future issues that may occur for the team to deal with. Just taking you through again really quickly, number of different HMO licensing issues and supplies in terms of water supply sampling that's been undertaken by the team as well, which is obviously of concern and been undertaken by the team in terms of responding to those service requests. Licensing team have undertaken a number of different activities, which has also gone to the licensing subcommittee. So I will just skip over some of that work, which is detailed in some of the other slides. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of that. Some of the licensing work is in relation to developing some of the strategies around the VORG work that we'll be doing. So that's the violence against women and girls, and making improvements to some of the licensing policy adaptations and improvements that were approved earlier this year in relation to our statement of licensing policy that the board may be familiar with, committee may be familiar with. And then in relation to the antisocial behaviour team, so the enforcement and antisocial behaviour team that deals really and primarily around envirocrime service requests. The total number of requests for this team has been 1,967 and quite a high number resolved there, 1,864 resolved, and the remainder of which are either ongoing complex cases or referred to other teams to deal with. So haven't been closed off per se when this report was undertaken. Number of different fixed penalty notices that have been issued by the team in relation to public protection notices in public car parks owned by the council, mainly in relation to car meets and other issues and concerns, but being enforced by the team as is expected. And then a number of different service requests around animals in relation to stray dogs also being undertaken by the team. Shared service agreement arrangements. So in this slide, and I know my colleague who's online has gone through some of those already, but just in terms of touching on those, the service has undertaken a number of different service requests in terms of the intelligence reports and also the enforcement work that's been undertaken by the public protection team. And then there's a slide that outlines for the committee there the access to the various officers within that team, which provides huge amounts of assistance and also expertise in terms of skills and various experiences that those officers within that shared service are able to bring to that shared service. There is a strategic assessment document which is undertaken by our public protection partnership colleagues, which outlines some of the emerging issues for us to be concerned about around this area of work. And then the last couple of slides, which are in the pack, also go through some of the numbers involved in terms of service requests, intelligence database entries, which are shared nationally, locally and regionally. And then sort of the areas of focus which we've covered in terms of some of the fraud, money laundering, counterfeiting, and also some of the vaping and doorstep crime issues. There's some routine inspection work that we still undertake, some test purchasing information within the slides, which we can take some questions on, and then also some information within the slide deck around the emergency planning work, which is also part of the enforcement and safety team remit, which relates to some of the work in connection to the local Thames Valley Resilience Forum, the business continuity work that's been undertaken by the team to ensure that business continuity arrangements are in place, out of hours response to emergency planning, and then also the adverse weather plan and the council's emergency response framework in the event of a serious or an emergency incident which may occur. And then also some of the work undertaken in respect of operational response, Storm Henk, and then some larger training exercises which have been undertaken by that section of the team in relation to emergency planning response. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the incredibly comprehensive summary. That was it's a huge amount of information to get through. Thank you. Questions from the room?
No, you first.
Oh,
Councillor.
thank you very much. In relation to trading standards, I think we need to be honest about the capacity issue, and the impact of what has. I wonder if you could talk about the impact of what has been the decline in funding, because it is one of the areas where it's been most stark. And I mean, recently we saw in Enfield when they were reduced, in the budget, it was actually reduced from 4 to 1 staff member, I think, for 330,000 residents. And you know, there was a very strong case made that across the whole of local government, what is happening is that trading standards is becoming much more reactive than a proactive entity, basically, because that's all there is the capacity to do. And I wondered if you could talk about sort of like what the impact of those cuts has been in terms of like ongoing protection for residents. And in the light of that, also more and more things are being landed on it. I'm thinking particularly about the new regulations around vaping, which are going to involve an enormous amount of work, as far as I can see, with very little idea of where the funding would come from. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the pressures that are experienced and what can be done on both the local and the national level, because, you know, I feel this is, maybe Philip Morris could put their hands in their pockets to support some of this. But anyway.
I was just going to say, Chair, I can talk at some level, but what I'm going to do is probably ask my colleague Sean to come in and answer that more specifically, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the changing landscape of demand of new legislation. We expect to see the tobacco bill back, and you say there will be a raft of new legislation around tobacco controls and vaping in the autumn potentially. But I think really the way that we handle this and the way that we've collectively handled this as an authority is to share our resource with other authorities. So if you go back to one of the slides that was in the deck that Narinda went through, it talked about the resourcing that in trading standards and the resourcing that sits around trading standards. So part of that is effectively the trading standards officers and the enforcement officers. But supporting that now, in order to deal with some of the challenges that we have today, you need a whole range of really highly specialist officers. So, for example, in our investigations acquisitive crimes team, we have 5 staff, 3 of whom are ex-detectives at various levels. We have an intelligence team of 1.5 officers. Really importantly, we have a shared legal unit, case management unit that we call it, basically with specialists in there. We've got a couple of solicitors, a barrister and a chartered legal exec in there that work with Wokingham's in-house legal team and who sign off all of the prosecutions on Wokingham's name. We have financial investigators who are able to look at money laundering and confiscation to remove the proceeds of crime, basically where people are committing crime. And then on top of that, you've got people like victim support officers and specialist officers dealing with things like animal health and welfare. Looking forward, we put a lot of investment into apprenticeships and training. I'm pleased to say that a lot of the staff that we have in the Trading Standards Service, the qualified staff, are people that we've trained ourselves, whether that be financial investigators or whether that be trading standards officers. And we currently have 2 people going through the level 6 the level 6 training to become training standards officers, and we have 4 people going through level 4 training. I'm sure at least one of those will probably go on into the training standards world in due course. So it is a really complex area. We have an eye on the future. The strategic assessment that's been circulated, and we've got an updated version to circulate after the meeting, shows how we're trying to address some of those priorities, how we're trying to make our work relevant to the council's priorities. So there's a lot of talk in there about protecting vulnerable residents. There's a lot of talk in there about safeguarding and those things that are relevant to us as a local authority. But it is a complicated area of work. We are really dealing with national issues sometimes at local level, and so much of the crime that we deal with is cross-border. But I think one of the strengths we have basically is that we have pooled our resource across the 3 authorities, and it does enable us to have a critical mass of expertise.
Thank you, Caroline.
This is more a clarification. When you were talking about inspecting food places, do you do market traders as well in Wokingham Town as part of the inspections? I probably missed it somewhere, but
Yes, they're included.
they are. Thank you.
I think still got to stand up from Steve Brown.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a statement of the obvious, but the importance of this sort of work for the council, for the residents, for the businesses of Wokingham really shouldn't be underestimated. That sort of regulatory work that's done to check, to make sure people are safe, to make sure things are enforced, that resilience work in emergency planning, to make sure that there's plans, there's training, there's development. So if the worst does happen, we've got plans, we're rehearsed, we're ready to go. And the work of staff dealing with the major festivals that bring sort of economic benefits and vitality into the borough. You know, the work that's gone over the last week with Headley Festival and the hours that the staff have put in to make sure that that is safe and delivered well shouldn't be underestimated. So these are services that probably don't always attract the limelight, but they're there, they're working in the background, and if they don't quite work and if there are issues, it really does get exposed, and that would bring a lot of work to members' inboxes as well. So just to remember that, you know, the importance of this and the work that quietly goes on in the background, you know, individually as a council and with Sean at PPP shouldn't be underestimated and again forgot about.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I'd like to thank the officers for that really detailed update. I've seen firsthand for the last 20 years the work of our licensing teams across the whole of Berkshire and the work that it does. And I think Steve, you're right that this is one of those areas that doesn't get limelight, but actually impacts everything that we do, from the test purchases, from all of the work, from the festival, from ensuring that you know, all of our food establishments are run properly, for everything that's done to protect the residents. And it isn't an area that gets a huge amount of limelight in the public eye. And I'd like to thank you for the work that you do. It's a huge amount of work, and it's a comprehensive report. And when you look at just the level of the amount, the sheer numbers of things that the team has accomplished, residents are very well served by this. So I know there are lots of challenges, but I wanted to just say thank you. Right, are we happy to note the update? Excellent. Right, so in which case we shall move on to agenda item 10, which is the electric vehicle charging strategy. And obviously we have 2 exec members here this evening. Which of you would like to go first?
I'll say a couple of things first of all, and I'm going to be very, very brief, which is pretty rare for me. Pretty rare for me. Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers for the enormous amount of work which has gone into producing this document. The background evidence is quite significant, so a big thank you to the officers for that. There is a recommendation here, but the EV charging strategy will form a daughter document of the emerging local transport plan 4. That is quite similar to the bus service improvement plan and the local cycle and walking infrastructure plan, which have both already been adopted. And we're looking to adopt this later in the autumn in around November time. I don't know if Jordan wants to say anything.
No, I'm happy. I believe is it George and Rob are going to speak on this matter.
Sophia has got a presentation for you, which I'm sure you will really enjoy, because it actually encompasses a lot of the information that's contained in the report and the main document itself, and it brings things to light. So it is really good. So popcorn will come round later.
Over to you.
Thank you.
It's always the pressure when you're doing a shared screen like this, and then make me large, make sure everyone can see it.
Thank you. On this meeting today, the Council is seeking input from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee prior to putting the draft EV charging strategy out to public consultation for adoption later in the year. The Department for Transport has announced that it is looking to introduce a statutory duty for local authorities to have local EV charging strategies. In its response to the Future of Transport Zero Emission Vehicles consultation, the TFT says...
Just a very quick point of order. I think Sophie just said seeking approval from the Overview and Scrutiny
It's seeking input. We
Input,
like,
fine.
yeah.
Okay. Fine. As long as we're clear.
Okay, thank you. That's all right. In its response to the Future of Transport Zero Emission Vehicles consultation, the DFT says it will update local transport plans to include the need for local transport authorities to produce EV charging strategies, and therefore this strategy will be one of the supporting documents of our emerging local transport plan. Nationally, the UK government has committed to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2035 in an effort to decarbonise road vehicles and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. To facilitate the phased out of internal combustion engine vehicles, the government developed a zero-emission vehicle mandate requiring manufacturers to sell an increasing proportion of EVs each year. These sales targets were introduced in January 2024 and will gradually increase every year until they reach 100% at 2035. At a local level, in July 2019, Wokingham Borough Council declared a climate emergency and is committing to playing as full a role as possible, leading by example as well as by exhortation, in achieving a carbon neutral borough by 2030. Transport, as you can see, is the second largest contributor following the domestic sector to the borough's carbon emission, responsible for 31.2% in 2020. Internal combustion engine vehicles are a leading cause of transport emissions, and so electric vehicles have a key role to play in reducing greenhouse gases, improving air quality, and tackling climate change. While this plan focuses on the switch from ICEVs to EVs, it is important that EV charging infrastructure is seen as part of a much wider sustainable transport strategy, which emphasizes the benefits of active travel for shorter journeys and the use of public transport. Simply switching all vehicles from ICEVs to EVs will not solve issues around congestion or public health. This is emphasized by our emerging local transport plan fund, which provides further actions around non-EV related activity. And the EV charging strategy clarifies the rationale for its development and sets out where we are now in providing charging for cars across our borough, our charging needs by 2030, and how this can be met. The strategy lays out the role of the Council in meeting this demand and presents our vision along with an action plan for the rollout of EV charging infrastructure by 2030. Throughout this strategy, the Council will enable the delivery of electric vehicle infrastructure ahead of need, which will prevent lack of suitable charge points being a barrier to some users. This will ensure a just transition, addressing market failure, but making sure that the less commercially attractive yet important sites are appropriately equipped and drive best practice.
Our main principle is to ensure that the right charge point of the right power is installed in the right place for the right users. In doing so, we will continue engaging with residents, businesses and private sector, establishing a thriving public charge point network across our borough. Here you can see a summary of the objective and the vision and objectives of the EV charging strategy. I'm not going into much detail into this. So the next step, our aim is to go out to public consultation late summer 2024, then take on board the feedback received and update the draft version of the EV strategy, and then adopt the document late autumn 2024. As Paul mentioned, this strategy will constitute one of the supporting documents of our emerging local transport plan 4, which is going to be submitted to executive in October 2024. And also at this point, it is worth mentioning that the draft EV charging strategy has been reviewed and updated following comments from officers, relevant members, and energy saving trust specialists. The final strategy, when it's adopted, it will remain a live document and will be reviewed regularly as technology advances and new policies and funding streams are brought forward. So I'm happy to take on any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. That was well, that was an excellent presentation. You're right. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions to this, but can I just clarify before we start? Just the timings of this. So there's input from this tonight and any further. Is this the last chance that members of this committee will have to do that, or is there a time of a couple of days where anything else can be fed through? I'm just trying to understand how much time we need to allow for this evening, obviously to exhaust any questions that people have got.
Happy to receive further questions following this meeting. I understand that this is a short version, but we have also developed a more lengthy version if somebody is interested in more details or to find out more technical aspects or the background of the strategy.
Thank you.
Chair, I'd just like to say the background documentation, if anybody does want to have a look at it, it is very complex and it's very technical. All right, just a word of warning, really.
Yeah. The summary documents is comprehensive. Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. Firstly, I think it'd be useful to get a list of the proposed charging point locations. I can't see it in here, but the second question, I noticed you've got an objective in here of having a charge point in every council-owned car park, and I'm just wondering how we're going to pay for that, because having sort of appropriate levels of electricity supply to every single car park we've got might be the most expensive way of doing it if there's several car parks close together, rather than having more points in one. And I'm just wondering if you're going to be flexible about that, and rather than incurring a cost just to put one in every car park where you might have two car parks within 100 yards of each other.
Thank you, Pauline. At this stage, we don't have specific locations. However, we have target areas or zones. As you can see, there are a couple of maps that has identified the areas that we need to focus, and these are areas where residents lack off-street parking. We expect that most of the charging will take place at home, where residents park their vehicles most of the time. So we need to focus at the areas where there isn't off-street parking, and therefore residents will rely on public charge points. Probably you might be aware that we recently secured funding through the local electric vehicle infrastructure scheme. So we are in the process of identifying locations. We have a platform. We have set up an inbox where we receive requests from residents who lack off-street parking, and they would be interested in a public charge point. So these are taken into account. We have also developed a geospatial analysis where we mapped these areas that lack off-street parking, the existing infrastructure, so that we are able to understand any gaps in the provision. We also plotted car parks, and some other layers that will help us identify the locations. So in relation to your second question, our aim is to every car park to have at least one charge point. I understand that if we provide more sockets or more charge points in one car park or in one location, that will bring the DNO cost or the total cost lower, but it is good to ensure that there is provision along the entire borough, so there aren't areas that lack infrastructure.
So I can think of a few areas where there are 3 or 4 council car parks really close together, and I would worry that we're going to put entire high voltage mains supply to every car park in order to meet this target of 1 charger per car park, would actually be more cost effective to put a group of them together.
Yeah, we can look at this further. However, one point that it is worth mentioning is that we installed recently in October some charge points at the Denmark Street car park, and then at the other car park, I think it's Cockpit, which is nearby, and we noticed that both locations are being used highly. So
yeah, I'm just seeking assurance that we're not going to just chuck money at it on the basis of a principle when you could do it differently and actually do it for less, and even maybe provide more.
Paul, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah. All I was going to say is we will be flexible on where we choose the locations. It's making sure there aren't any gaps in particular locations. That's the key bit.
Any more questions around the room? I'm going to say in this case, your hand went up just a smidge fast. Caroline.
Sure, thank you. It's 2 questions. In your duration timescales, you've got making the most of funding a priority 2. I would have thought trying to find money, wouldn't that be better to be a priority 1? Because you've got in here making the most of funding opportunities, you've got it 2. It just seems we need the money before we do all this work. Why isn't that a number 1 as a priority rather than 2?
There isn't a priority, just the bullet points of our objectives. That doesn't mean that encourage the private sector is second on the list, whereas make the most of funding opportunities is first, so it's not in an order.
Okay, thank you. I did have a second one, which you touched on in the infrastructure. Will we have enough? Because at the same time we're doing car parks, we've got residential, we've got commercial, we've got cars going into homes. Will the infrastructure cope? Or are we talking to SEB now or Scottish Electric? Thank you.
Are you referring to the grid connection, the capacity? Yeah. As I said earlier, the focus at the time being is the areas that lack off-street parking, so on-street locations. At those locations, the most suitable charge points are lower power, so they don't pose any, they don't put any strain on the grid capacity.
Before I do, can I ask a follow-up? Have we got, I know this with a certain amount of information before, but do we have reserve grid capacity in areas where we're rolling out where the grid's rolling out new power capabilities? Have we actually kind of reserved allocations of that for this element of strategy for estate planning?
We are engaging currently with SSEN, our local DNO, so there are some synergies, or we are having regular meetings with them, so we can inform them about the exact locations and see if any of the areas required any further works. But at the moment, we don't think that this is an issue, at least for the projects that we are working currently.
I'm going to get to Mary Louise next.
Thank you. In relation to residential charging, particularly the residential where you don't have on-street parking, this is obviously in Norries, this is you know, but I think all over the borough, this is a serious issue, and also one that can cause quite a lot of friction and distress, both, you know, within, you know, between households, because, you know, I had to allowed myself a snigger when you said that it will not be permitted to have wires across the pavement, because I've seen them, I've tripped up over them, delivering leaflets, and residents have also reported it and looking forward, what space in there in this strategy to sort of engage with the public as to A, why you shouldn't do it, although most of them know, they just don't have an alternative, and B, offering people viable alternatives. And the other one is also around the public charging points which were proposed, which again have caused quite a lot of disquiet, quite a lot, in terms of, from the perspective of people living on that road, that represents the loss of a parking place, which is at a premium. So that's an issue as well. And finally, can we take this learning and put it into our engagement with developers for the future? Because we should not be allowing developments to go ahead that do not have, serious amounts of capacity. And when I go over some of the newer estates, it doesn't look like that is there. So it would be good to know if this was going to be integrated into the planning regulations.
Thank you. A lot of questions. So regarding the trailing cables, as you mentioned, this is an issue. It is against our policy because it can cause a trip hazard and it contravenes the Highway Act 1980. So unfortunately, every council takes a different approach. So there are some councils that allow residents to run cables across the footways. However, we do believe strongly that somebody may trip over, and also this puts into liability the resident who is running the cable. There are a few trials from other countries about the cable gullies or the cross pavement solutions, but before we go ahead and do one of these trials, we are awaiting the government guidance that is going to be released during this summer or late summer. So for the time being, our focus is on public charge points. We are focusing on the pedestal charge points and at the areas where residents don't have off-street parking. The issue here is that the public charge points, the VAT on those is 20%, and also the suppliers are putting a high investment and they need to recoup it, and therefore the rates tend to be higher than the domestic rates that somebody can pay for if he had a charge point at his property, whereas there at the properties the VAT is 5%, so there is difference in there as well. You are right that we need to make sure that all new developments are equipped with charge points. The proof document S of takes this into account and says that all new buildings with associated car parking, they are undergoing major renovation. They need to provide for charge points. So our highways development team are making sure that all new developments are equipped with charge points. And can you please remind me about the second point?
Yes, sorry. It was about the when you're putting in one of these on the road, about engagement with the neighbours, with the people living there, because it is for them both a lot. It's experienced by them as the loss of a parking space, and B, another hazard on the road. And the horror of Crutchley Road slalom shows that you're getting more and more street furniture, which is actually preventing people from using the pavement. Now, the problem with engagement is that, from my understanding, if you asked people, they would probably say no. Yeah, and yet these things are necessary. So I'm just asking what steps you are thinking about in terms of, you know, raising understanding of the importance and but taking account of where it can, you know, engaging with the community as to where it is, because some of my residents have said that they woke up one morning and there was one there. Yeah, and there was one less parking space, one more obstacle on the pavement, and people had no idea of where it had come from or why it was there. So, yeah.
You are right. Unfortunately, there is this NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. So nobody wants a charge point outside of his house. And we are trying to avoid placing charge points in front of people's properties. And not because they have this essence of ownership. They believe that this area belongs to them, whereas actually this is not the case. This is public highway, this is highway adopted land. Our priority is to focus on the areas where we have requests from residents. So we have set up a process, as I mentioned earlier, that we receive requests from residents. So we are focusing at current need. Of course, it is very challenging to install infrastructure ahead of need. But at some point, residents will actually realize that this is quite essential. As soon as they make the switch to the EVs, they will require this infrastructure to charge their vehicles. We ran a survey a couple of years ago trying to understand where are the areas that will benefit more, where are the areas that we need to focus and benefit the residents. And also we are organizing an EV event in September this year. So we'll try to engage again with residents and businesses and see which are the areas that we can focus. The previous time with the org scheme, the timelines were quite tight, so we didn't have the option to go out and undertake a public consultation. Also, this is not a requirement. The installation of charge point is a permitted development, so it is not a statutory requirement to go out and consult with the public. It's like the lamppost columns. However, we serve the needs of the residents, so we need to make sure that they are placed in areas that they will be used. We don't want to put them in locations that they don't want them or they won't be used. So we will try as much as possible to take their feedback or their opinions into account.
Can I just add to that? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so with the first round of installations that we did on the Orcs project, we tried to find, as Sophia said, as many spaces as we could that weren't outside homes and where there isn't a high parking pressure. What we found was, particularly in some of those more built up areas, there were some sort of stronger objections because people did feel they were losing a parking space. So at the moment, the TRO for one of the streets hasn't been implemented, so you can still park an ICE car in those bays at the moment. So in the longer run, when more and more people do switch to electric vehicles, then we would look to bring in a TRO potentially to prevent ICE vehicles parking in those bays. But for the time being, we're keeping those as kind of dual use bays so that people can park in them, you know, and not get fined. So we are really aware of how that competition for spaces within those, particularly where there's a high competition for spaces already, we don't want to be causing arguments between residents, as you say. And the other point was about additional street furniture. We've also ensured that we have got sufficient space around all of the installations that we put in. So you put in a feeder pillar and the charging point itself, and Sophia's been out measuring all of the streets to make sure that we can get a wheelchair or a buggy through, as well as having sufficient space to manoeuvre around those. And the last thing was just to say that we are taking learning from that Orcs project onto the next level. So we will want to be doing some resident engagement. Might not necessarily be a consultation, but it'll be more of a notification and a query as to whether they, could suggest a better place in the same vicinity if they don't feel that's an appropriate place for a charge point location.
Thank you. Martin.
Yes, I mean, I happen to have an EV, but I do have a charging point at home. But that gives me the advantage. I'm paying about 9 pence a unit for my charging. And one of the issues with the current on-street public charges is that VAT, and the rate is that much higher. And I think it would be interesting to see how much of the opposition would go if there is a UK standard that exists for this cross-payment device of whatever it's going to be to get the electricity from your property safely to the curbside without trip hazard to get into the car, because then people will feel that they've got control. At the moment, I think it's a little bit of a pushback against it, because they really would like to feed it at 9p a unit, not the sort of 30, 40, 50p a unit that comes from one of those charging points. Even if they had one outside each of their homes, I think would still be able to push back. But I think that issue is greater than Wokium's, because it should be a UK standard, so that we're not all as local authorities trying to come up with our own risk assessments. If it was a uniform BS, whatever it's going to be, a C or a CA standard, whatever it's going to be, that would help us all. And perhaps that's something for the country as a whole to solve that problem, because that would make life much easier.
I think it's interesting, before I come back to you for answer. I think there's an element of looking at for future proofing as well.
Yeah.
As we're looking into the next version of the local plan, where that comes from, putting in the channels and putting in the conduit, and there was one on Dragon's Den that got ridiculed for its price. But future proofing some of that design briefs for new estates and new builds will be, I think, vital.
Yes.
The other part, and I said this to Jordan earlier, I spend a lot of time up in Richmond. And Richmond in London Borough of Richmond on Thames is just rolling out a new partnership agreement to roll out more lamp post charging. I'm not sure not saying that should be part of this, but in other places where there's been lots of new development, you put the lamppost on the left-hand side, not the curb side, and you can't use lamppost charging. But I think if we're looking at modal shift for the future and trying to drive that EV adoption and remove some of the range anxiety and everything else, actually, I think having a different thought longer term about how do we do lamppost placements on new estates that we're building, because if you put them on the pavement side, the house side or non-road side, you can't use lamppost charging. If you put them on the curb side, you can. Then you end up with the ridiculousness of people having the arms that come over their own pavements, which I've seen a couple of trials which look ridiculous, and I'm more worried about the safety of those. But I think there's, as Martin said, there is a whole, this isn't just as simple as the hubs for charging, which is part of the solution. I think we have to look at the longer term. So I'd be interested to know about where that would fit into this, or local plan reviews, or how we look at design standards for future estates building, because that's part of the solution in addition to this and the joint venture. Sorry, I tacked on the back of that selfishly. Sophia.
Yeah, you're both absolutely right, and that's why we're waiting for the government guidance around the cross-pavement solutions, so that we know what is the best way to move forward. We have been also engaging with our neighbour authorities and also other authorities that have trialed these solutions to learn from their experiences. From discussions with Reading, residents have these expectations that they can park outside their properties, whereas this is not always the case. You can't always make sure that there will be an available parking space outside your property when you need it. And then if they park further from their house and then they run this cable, we will end up again in this scenario where somebody may trip over. So yeah, we're waiting for the guidance to see what is the best way moving ahead. However, with the pedestal charge points that we are installing, if more suppliers come into the market, then that will break the monopoly. So I hope we're gonna reduce the tariffs. However, at the moment, at the ORCS charge points that we install, residents pay 55p per kilowatt hour, which is lower than the average price reported by ZapMap. So it's not that high compared to other locations.
Hi, couple of questions. Firstly, do you think supply of charging points meets demand as of today?
Currently, I think we have quite a good network. Even the council owns 133 charging sockets, and we are trying to install ahead of demand, so we are at a good stage. Our aim is to accelerate, to increase the rollout of charge points by using the Levi scheme. We have received we have secured £264,000, and we envisage to use this funding to leverage private investments. So if we manage actually to secure 90% of private investments, that will help us a lot to increase the number of charge points in the borough. We are also in discussions with other suppliers, or particularly with BT, so that we can repurpose some of the old cabinets that they are on the footways. That means that we can again increase the number of charge points, but not adding street clutter, as it was mentioned earlier, because these feeder cabinets, these green cabinets, are already on the footway, so we are going to reuse them. And
my concern is if we push supply too far ahead of demand, we could end up in a situation in a market where technology is rapidly changing, where we end up spending and wasting a lot of council of residents' money by putting in stuff that in the eventuality is never used.
Yeah, it's hard to find the right balance, but the growth of EVs is exponential. So if we wait first for the demand, it will be too late to install the infrastructure. And this is actually the guidance that has been given by us, by the government, that our purpose is to install ahead of demand. Also, we are not using our own funding. In both cases, and with the ORCS and with the Levi scheme, we have been utilizing and trying to secure government funding, and then leverage private investments, because we believe that the supplier should take the risk, and they have the expertise to help us increase the number of charge points in our borough.
So how far ahead do you think we are at the moment, and how far ahead do you think we should be in terms of supply versus demand?
That's hard to tell. I believe we are in the beginning of this journey. We started the installations of residential charge points last year, but we are positive about the outcome. As you can see from the document, there are certain targets for 2025 and 2030. Our consultant WSP help us to forecast the demand for charge points and at the general level, and what is the need, what is the role of the council, so how many charge points need to be installed by the public sector. That includes us, and also national highways or other public organizations.
And the one other point I'd just like to make is I wouldn't like to think that the strategy changed by the fact that we were appealing for money elsewhere, because at the end of the day, it's all taxpayers' money. So we need to be just as protective of funds coming in that are state funded as Borough Council funded.
However, you need to bear in mind that the supplier, it's hard to convince him actually to put the finance or their money in areas that they won't be usable. So usually they tend to have a preference at the more commercially attractive location, so that they can recoup their investment as well. Our aim, though, is to deliver an equitable network and make sure that there aren't any gaps in the provision, so that areas that where usage is expected to be low or they require different types of charge points, these are equipped as well. So these residents have the opportunity to switch to EVs as well.
Thank you very much.
Great. Any last questions? Pauline.
Just out of curiosity, how much do you, on average, does one charge point cost, including installation?
The previous time it was around 11 to 12,000 pounds, and that included the DNO connections, the installation, and the actual equipment. But we have to bear in mind that if we install more charge points, that means that the average cost will drop. However, because our areas, there are quite a few areas where residents have off-street parking, so it's not so suitable to install groups of 5 or 6 charge points.
So when I was involved in this right at the beginning, there was a lot of talk about repurposing curbs in order to make them charge points, because we'd moved all the lampposts from the roadside to the inside of the pavement for road safety reasons when we replaced all the columns and all the lights. And we didn't really want to move them back again. And I just wondered if that's gone anywhere.
I'm not aware about this, but as you mentioned, because most of the the lamppost columns were moved on the back of the footways, we weren't able to use those to power up electric vehicles, because we're going to have the issue with running cables through the across the footways, and then again the trip hazard that they might create.
So if I could just come in there for Pauline's benefit, the curb feature that you were talking about, Pauline, that was supplied by a company called Connected Curb. So they were invited to tender to the Auks bid, and I think they did. But obviously we end up going for whichever one gives us the best in terms of the number of charge points that we can get. But they'll certainly be invited again to come back and bid when we do the Levi work later, well, early next year, I think it'll be, won't it, Sophia?
Thanks, Rob.
This though was again pedestal charge points. It wasn't lamppost charge points. So it was similar to the ones that we have already installed, the connected curb feature.
Yeah,
Sorry,
but they do supply a variety of different designs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are suitable designs. It's just that you didn't pick them.
No, I think it's most of that comes down to cost, I think, ultimately. But we can certainly look at it again. And I think, as we said before, when the market comes forward, if more and more in those more popular areas, if people are interested, then we can invite them to come in and obviously go through the relevant procurement channels.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I'm not trying to push you to do something that's more expensive than you have to do.
No.
I haven't gone mad.
Thanks.
Great. So nothing else on this. There's a recommendation about offering comments and recommendation. I think you've had a lot of feedback from around the room. Has that been captured so you can update? I guess if any member has any comment afterwards, feed that back in to you as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just suggest that, as in the past, we summarise the discussion and the points raised, and that gets then submitted up through the next process?
Useful. Thank you. Right.
Could I also suggest we request a list of the sites that are being considered?
Do you mean for the Levi charge points?
Well, for the next couple of rounds of new charge points.
Yeah, we can. We are happy to share the long list of locations. However, this will not be the exact list, the defined list, because locations will be updated, especially after we receive quotations from DNO.
Thank you. We should move on. Sophia, thank you for that really comprehensive update on a very technical subject. Feel free to leave if you wish. Right, we're going to move on to agenda item 11, which, given the somewhat soggy summer we've had and wet spring, wet winter, in fact, just given the recent weather seems quite topical. We're looking at the flood risk management update. Jordan.
I think you summarised it quite well there, Mark. That was all following an incredibly wet winter as well. It was 150% on the 1991 to 2020 average. And I believe the last time that average was beaten as well was the year before last. So it's a continuing issue. Speculation certainly on the impact that climate change is having on increasingly difficult weather events that we're experiencing. And as a result, it's had a significant amount of strain placed on our team here in Wokingham. And for this, I'm going to carry on to Andy Glencross to give us some more details.
Evening, everyone. I just think this is our usual annual update on flooding and drainage. And aside from the weather, which Jordan and Mark have already mentioned, I think it's worth noting a couple of things. The team we've successfully recruited this year. So we've successfully recruited a flood risk manager. Some of you will have met him already, Ray Drabble. And that's made a big difference to the amount of responsiveness and capital work that we've managed to get through this year. So I would like you to welcome Ray to the service if you haven't met him already. And we've also, as some of you might know, we had Eddie Napper, member of the team, long-standing member of the team, many of you will know, retired. And we are currently in the process of recruiting an apprentice to come in and replace that role. In terms of the wet winter, it was very, very wet this year, the wettest winter on record. And as Jordan said, which followed probably one of the wettest winters on record last year. Certainly the January to March period of 2023 was very, very wet. Just to look, that had an obvious impact on the number of flooding and drainage inquiries. You'll see some data in the report. It says we are about 50% up on the long-term average in terms of flooding and drainage calls this year. I would point out that in actual fact, we're about 100% up when you look at the figures for the winter. So it's actually been quite a testing time, and it won't surprise you to know that given the resources we've got, we've had a bit of a backlog in dealing with those drainage inquiries. The team are currently working through that, and we're also attempting to get some additional resource in to look at planning some of our capital works a bit better and getting that moving a bit quicker. In terms of the capital works themselves, we've made some good progress on a couple of good schemes. So we've hopefully sorted out most of the issues on the Culver Lane Bridge, which was a long-running bit of flooding, which hopefully now is a lot better. And also we've done some work around London Road, where we were having some property flooding. And I think we also got some flooding done in one of the lanes in Graiseley, which the landowner actually did some ditch work there. Other than that, I think the only other thing to note is that bringing the flood risk manager in, Ray Drabble, was really helpful. And most way it's helpful is it allowed Bonnie, who'd been covering that role, to go back and more focus on the development control responses on flooding and drainage. And so our performance on those elements has really picked up this year. Other than that, I'm open to questions if any of you got any.
Thank you, Pauline.
Thanks, Andy. I wonder how you're doing with Thames Water. There's a couple of things that I've highlighted recently from wandering around Woodley far too much that actually turn out to be culverts that are down to Thames Water, not down to us, and are causing flooding in our infrastructure. I'm just wondering how you're getting on with them and whether there's anything more we can do to apply pressure on them to act quickly.
So I would say the relationship is a lot better this year than it was last year. I'd say that part of that was due to the work of this committee, who invited Thames Water to come along and explain themselves on a number of issues. And I think that really focused their minds. But also, I think having the new flood risk manager in post has meant they've got someone who's actually got contacts, is starting to get a way into that organisation. And what we've found this year, to be fair to Thames Water, is they've been a lot more responsive on those, that sort of, when we find our gullies have emptied and there's no improvement, we then go and talk to them, and actually their response times are quicker, actually pretty much a lot better this time. So I'd say a positive.
How long do you think now then, Andy, roughly?
Oh, yeah, I would say it depends on the individual case, to be honest with you. There isn't an average response time. What I'm noticing is that we used to talk about, I mean, I've had ones, the one in Coleman's Lane, that took the best part of 9 to 12 months. Whereas I think some of the other ones we've had recently, they've been done within a month or two. So I think, but you know, it's individual circumstances, I suspect, Pauline, a lot of the time.
Thanks, Andy.
Mary Louise.
Thank you. It always makes me nervous when we have transitioning from a cyclical approach to a risk-based approach in terms of, does that actually mean less? Because I'm thinking particularly around the issue of gully jetting or gully sucking, which in the experience of residents of Norreys has moved from a sort of preventative, like it used to be done on quite a regular basis, and now it only happens when there is a problem, by which time, from the perspective of residents, it's too late. Yeah. So I just wondered what your thinking was there, and whether this does actually mean a reduction.
So in terms of the current approach, it is true that we reduced our frequency for 1 year. And that was the year before last, I think. Yes, year before last. And that was in order to have an experiment to see what the results were. And this year we've gone back to our original cyclical regime. So we have not yet moved to a to a risk-based approach. I'm not sure. I suspect residents think that we don't come round. I know. I get a lot of reports of people saying we never empty the gullies, whereas I know that we actually do a cyclical approach to emptying gullies, so I know we do it. What I would say is that I too have some nervousness about moving to a risk-based approach, but we've engaged a really good set of consultants who are actually looking at the data. Sometimes we initially started this process when we were looking at installing some sensors. I think, Pauline, you and I discussed that a while back. But actually the sensors, these sensors are quite expensive, and you can only put them in a percentage of your gullies. So what we decided to go back to was we actually have the data from the last 7 years of gully emptying. So each time they empty the gullies, they record the level of silt. So there's a hell of a lot of data about levels of silt in individual gullies across the whole of the borough. And we've asked a company to analyse that. And actually, we're going to base our sort of risk-based approach on those actual silt levels. Now, that to me, at the moment, we haven't got the results of that study. So until we have those results, we don't actually know whether it means less gully emptying or the same amount of gully emptying or even more gully emptying.
Sounds like one of those things for AI. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I think really just to pick up on Andy's point and to follow up on Pauline's point as well, that the report sort of introduces the notion that we have got climate change and weather events are changing. Rainfall is more frequent and perhaps more intense. And the way that we will need to look at sort of drainage and the way that our systems and processes work, the way that we look at sort of capital bids in the future, and the way that we look at planning our infrastructure will undoubtedly have to change. And I'm sure in the months and the years to come, there'll be further reports done to this committee to bring up some of those issues and to talk that through, because we are literally in the climate change environment and we'll need to adapt with that. So those would be some of the things that this report introduces and wishes to bring through. Also, more engagement perhaps with our sort of flood wardens at the sort of the town and the parish level to make sure that we're building resilience and collaboration. And that's where this work also then sort of blends into that emergency planning, that community resilience sort of approach as well. So that's an aspect of this work that we need to bring through. So again, there'll be future reports as we sort of understand the data more, as the work of the team develops, as we look at the impact of climate change. I'm sure we'll be bringing back reports and proposals in the future to adapt and change and pivot to all of that. And we'll be sort of working with our colleagues in emergency planning and with the flood wardens in our town and parishes. So there is a larger and growing agenda on this. And I'm sure there'll be further reports to come in the months and years to go as the situation and the picture emerges on this.
Caroline.
Thank you. I assume you work quite closely with Reading University in their weather forecasting to let us know if there's going to be a serious event, and I presume you use computers for flood management as well to see where the risks are going to be.
So we pay for a from memory we pay for a weather forecasting service. I don't think it's from the University of Reading. It's one that we pay for with regards to emergency planning and highways works, but for that predicting winter maintenance. But I think it's done by Met Office, I presume, but that's where the data probably comes from. But in terms of using computers, we rely on the Environment Agency data to predict both surface water flooding and fluvial flooding from the rivers. I think that we then rely on it's very difficult to model the impact of sort of storms because they often hit in very, very specific places, and you just get the rain comes down and then you have to react effectively.
Right.
Martin, sorry, Martin.
Martin, apology.
I have to say I quite like the idea that you're going to do what we've been doing in aviation for about 40, 50 years, which is move to on-condition maintenance. If you get on an aeroplane, the bits on it are just looked at based on the evidence of the past evidence, and you don't waste time disassembling aeroplanes just because they've got to X thousand hours. Depends on what it's been doing. So that's a good way forward. One of the things from my past life, I would suggest is that you do need to have a robust follow-up to make sure that your assumptions about condition have got some data checks, just so that you don't overcook it. But I think it is the right way to go. People get reassured seeing it disassembled. The gullies, the machine sucks out the sand. They think it's really great, but actually they could be going to a gully unnecessarily where it could have gone twice as long and saved a lot of time and money, and go to the one that needs emptying perhaps a little bit more frequently instead. So that's a good move.
To reassure you, when we do that gully emptying, even when we move to a risk-based approach, we'll still be collecting the data. So, we'll have that sort of a check that, are we doing the right thing? What we would hope would we be roughly removing the same amount of silt from each gully each time we end there, wouldn't we? If the risk-based approach is working.
Sorry, I thought I had Pauline first, but Dave first and then Pauline.
Yeah, fine. Hi, Andy. In my ward, there was a road Barge Lane that was flooded and then was unusable by residents for a period of many weeks. What's the usual time frame in terms of once a flooding issue is reported that it's going to be dealt with?
It very much depends on the cause. From memory, Barge Lane is down in Swallowfield Way, that's way, isn't it? Yeah, and isn't that isn't that due to fluvial flooding down there rather than surface water flooding? So I think, Dave, the problem is that if you're telling me if it's caused by for instance, a blocked gully by one of our gullies, then I will say that if it's unusable, we would have a gully emptier out within 24 hours to clear that gully. Now, the difficulty is this year is a lot of the lanes down that way have been very, very wet. And part of that is due to the fact that the drainage is not our highway drainage, but it's the drainage that is the agricultural drainage of the fields, the local fields. And for instance, I think the one in Kibes Lane in Graiseley, for instance, it took us about 3 or 4 months to get that sorted, because the actual solution was for a farmer to dig out a ditch, not alongside the lane, but leading away from the laneside ditch towards the river. And when we initially did that, what we found was that whilst we dug the ditch and the ditch was ostensibly flowing, the problem was it was flowing the wrong way back up from the river towards the lane, because the river levels were so high. So I would say that it kind of depends on the cause in terms of how long it takes us to get things cleared. And sometimes, on those very low-lying areas with very poor drainage, not very well constructed roads, it can be very difficult for us to actually solve the problem immediately.
Pauline.
Just something that shot into my mind, Andy. Do you check that all the gullies are actually being measured for silt? Because I've come across some that have grass growing in them, which suggests to me that they're not. Now, they might not be yours, to be fair, but suggests to me that they probably have never been cleaned, and that if they are yours, they're not on the map. So
that's a good question, and another bit of the subject of some of Ray's work. Ray, it's been really great having Ray with the team, because he started to bring a real eye for detail back to that team. And one of the things he's noticed is that our asset register is not entirely complete. So you're right. We do measure when they actually come and empty a gully. When they actually empty it, Pauline, they do measure the levels of silt. What I would say is that there do appear to be a few assets in our drainage and flooding and drainage assets that aren't on our register. If you do come across any like those, Pauline, then please report them, and we will try and get them added to the register. We are doing, Ray is doing a bit of a work with WSP to bring someone in from their GIS team to update that GIS register so that you can report it.
Just one final suggestion whilst you're doing that, in order to save money. George, I think you've got the same problem with litter bins. If you're going to pay somebody to come and map all your gullies, you might get them to map your litter bins at the same time and save a bit of double counting of cash.
I can take that away. I wasn't aware that we were doing that, but George and I can have a conversation sometime next week.
No, I was aware that you've got a map of litter bins that doesn't map the actual litter bins that are there.
Oh, right. Fair enough.
Great, thank you very much. Everyone happy to note the content of the report? Excellent. Homeward stretch. Agenda item 12 is the work programme for the coming months. Does anyone have any questions? Are we happy to note? Pauline.
What's the process for adding things? I'd like to add something.
It's a matter for the committee. If you want to suggest something, then if the committee's happy, it can get added in, and then we decide when to consider it.
I'm happy to flesh it out a bit more, but I think it'd be good to have a look at how the council's meeting the needs of the charity sector, and whether the way we do things, either by allocating assets or money, is reasonable, sensible, fair and equitable, and not biased in one way or another.
Could we?
So we can look at that, but it might be more suitable to go to the management committee rather than this. We could certainly find a home for it.
Thank you. Do you want me to write that down?
And maybe flesh it out a little. But it's an excellent suggestion. Any other comments on the work programme? No, happy to note. And then finally, if I can get my pages to turn, the action tracker for agenda item 13. Any comments on this? No. Happy to note that, in which case I think we've reached the end. So thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, meeting closed.